name is Isabella Greene. Welcome to my channel. Today I would like to share with you some stories and take a look at the phenomenon of disincarnates. What are disincarnates? Disincarnates are people who lost their physical bodies and have not transitioned out of earth plane. So this happens pretty frequently. This happens when a person dies suddenly. When a person dies in a car accident, for example, or a freak accident of some sort, and their soul is kind of stranded and in shock, and they don't even know that they're dead. So they very often just move themselves to or bring themselves back to their houses or to the environment where they passed. People who go into their houses are very often seen and observed by their loved ones. And very often, if that was their choice, they transition shortly thereafter. But the ones who, let's say, died in a hospital environment, or they died alone, or they died like that suddenly, executions are very common also to create disincarnates, especially because the people who are being executed are scared that they did wrong in this life, and they are terrified that, especially if they had the set of beliefs that they're not going to heaven because of their behavior. So these constitute disincarnates. And I want to tell you a few stories here, but that I encountered through my work. But the phenomenon of disincarnates is very common. And again, that happens not only through accidents or hospital deaths or executions, but it also happens sometimes when the people are very elderly and they're in the facility and they're super lonely. And they are scared to transition. So that second category of people, of souls, the ones who are scared to transition, very often will attach to the living human beings. And this could be someone who is in that same environment as they are. Let's say in the operation room, one patient died next door and they're terrified to go, and so they will go into the unconscious body of the patient next door who is being operated on. With car accidents, that immediate separation from the body is so shocking. They're looking for the physical connection, and the ones who come to help them very often pick them up and very often will carry them until, as a soul, as an attachment or an auric attachment, until they're properly transitioned. Very often children who die suddenly attach, and it depends on each individual case. But I want to tell you a few examples that I encountered through my work and also my own self. So I did not know much about that years ago, and that was probably about 5 years ago when I was just coming into understanding of this phenomenon. And I was driving, and I drove by a massive car accident, and the next day, literally by the end of this day, one of my eyes started watering, and my eye was just watering non-stop, and I couldn't stop it. It was bothering me during sleep. I kept thinking about that accident. Like, I felt deep disturbance and some sort of presence, but at that point I didn't quite understand what was going on with me. And the next day I happened to have a meeting with the person in-person meeting with someone who actually works on me since she works on me as in to check that my energy field is clear. I do these checkups regularly about every 3 months to make sure that I didn't miss anything in my own self-clearing. So she's a great help and support for me. But at that point, we were just getting introduced to each other. and she was in Sedona, and I met with her, and my eye keeps running. And she said, "What's wrong with your eye?" And I said, "Well, I don't know what. It just happened, started running last night." And she said, "Let's step outside. I'll take a look at you." And as she started scanning, she said, "You have a dead woman in your energy field." And she died in an accident. I said, "Wait a minute, I drove by the accident yesterday." "Well," she said, "what about the time and when your eyes started watering?" I was like, "Yeah, that's exactly right after I looked at that site." And so she transitioned that woman properly, and instantly my eyes stopped watering. She said she was crying over her loss of her, like her children being orphaned now, or her children losing the mother, and that she was so devastated that she lost her life, that she wanted to hold on to this reality, and she was crying in my body, through my body, in my energy field. So that's a very quick example because it was in and out. But some people carry disincarnates for lifetimes, or sometimes these are transitions through different experiences. And so, for example, if you have an elderly lady, this is very common when the women die elderly in nursing homes or facilities where they don't have anyone visiting them, and they're super lonely, and they will see a young beautiful woman, a young beautiful girl or boy, it doesn't matter, visiting someone else. Very often when they develop that kind of attachment, and so when they pass, and if that person is present there, they would kind of attach because they already have an emotional interaction while they're still alive. And so when that happens, I actually worked with a woman who had this kind of case, and she said that all of a sudden she started feeling really old. And she was in her 30s. She said that she, like, her legs became really, really stiff, her hips were really stiff. All of a sudden, like overnight, she developed that condition that she felt like she could not run anymore, she could not exercise anymore, she felt exhausted, she felt incredibly sad, and just, she said, what happened to me? Like, all of a sudden she used to be very athletic, very sporty, and then suddenly her hips and her joints became very stiff, and she could not use her lower parts of her body all that well. And so as I looked at her, I found that disincarnate older lady there, and as we transitioned her, the client wrote back to me and said, "Oh wow, you know, my legs are back to the way they used to be." And there's another example that I just worked with, and I found that it was very interesting because it's a little more complicated. Very often with the people who are involved with war, they pick up souls that died in war and did not transition properly. And in this particular case, I worked with a nurse who works in a veterans facility. And as I worked on her energy field, I found a Vietnamese disincarnate officer who died from execution on his knees in the middle of Vietnamese jungle. And that was during the Vietnam War. He was the captain of a platoon, or whatever that's called, a number of troops, and they were all captured, whoever survived. And he was literally shot in the head by a person to whom he attached. So this woman all of a sudden developed a headache on the side of her head, and she said it felt like I would touch it, and it felt like, that's part of her head, she would touch it, and it felt like it was a flesh wound, but there was nothing there, and she did not have any sort of injury herself. So she would just, and she said that as soon as she would focus and tap on the side of her head where that pain appeared, it would expand into her entire head, and that she would get this massive headache. And that has started happening about 5-6 years ago, and this is the timeline that I received from the Disincarnate because I interviewed him and I asked him, what happened to you? And he showed me. How do you think I know this whole story? So he showed me the moment of his death and the circumstances of his capturing, and that he decided to attach to his executioner to torment him. That happens too. So he wanted, and so that woman worked with the man who carried that disincarnate. And that man had mental state that he could not, he had massive PTSD related to that incident. And so the soul of that officer from Vietnam was literally contributing, constantly reminding him, and the guy died in a really unpleasant state of being, and then that Vietnamese soul transferred onto the nurse that was taking care of that case. And so she started carrying it, and she inherited the flesh wound situation, or the feeling of that. And so as we transferred that officer, that soul, properly out of her energy field, I am quite sure it just happened this week, so I don't know about the outcome yet. By the way, sometimes it's instant that your symptoms are gone, and sometimes the body takes a little while to rearrange itself. It depends on how fast your energy is moving. So I have a very strong suspicion that her headache, her mystery headache, is going to disappear, because I asked that gentleman that I interviewed, the one that passed on, the officer guy, and he said that he's been with her for about 5-6 years, and that's exactly the timeline that she remembers when her headache started. So I wanted to share these stories with you because I feel that these are not talked about enough, but that phenomenon is very common. Very often souls congregate around the battlefields, around the areas where they lost their lives. Very often, in cases of suicide, they will come into a house of their best friend and just hang out there for months and months. And I worked with a few cases where that actually took place, and they said, oh, I love my friend, but they're here. They're still here, and it bothers me. And so these souls, sometimes, the ones that are not attached to a physical body, to another physical body, obviously, they would transition eventually when they're ready. Sometimes they need to be assisted. In the case of when they are attached to someone else and already kind of made at home in their space, in that physical body, in that energy field, that's when they really need to be helped out and transitioned out of the energy fields, and that's a part of what I do too. So I wanted to share with you a little bit of information on this phenomenon today. Thank you for tuning in. Thank you for listening. If you'd like to have a session with me, you can reach me at IsabellaGreene.com. Otherwise, please subscribe to my YouTube channel. I'll bring you all kinds of information on this channel. And now, take care. I'll see you next time. Namaste.